Hi, I'm Yonit Levy of Channel 12 in Tel Aviv.
And I'm Jonathan Friedland of The Guardian in London.
And we are Unholy, Two Jews on the News from Keshet Podcasts. It is actually, Jonathan, our 13th episode. Mazel tov.
Mazel tov to you, Shakoyach. I should really be dancing and singing. So dancing and singing especially in a high-pitched voice, wearing a scratchy, uncomfortable suit. I'm having flashbacks to the year I turned 13, and this is a much more comfortable experience, I've got to be honest.
I'm still waiting for those embarrassing Bar Mitzvah photos of yours.
I realise, actually, you will never see any photographs of me as a Bar Mitzvah boy because both the event and the party itself were all during the Sabbath. It was a Shabbat Bar Mitzvah and party, and therefore no cameras were used by my Orthodox affiliated parents, and so there are no pictures. There are no photographs at all, which I think is rather, that shows some great deal of foresight on their part some 40 odd years ago. I think that was very shrewd because it means you cannot embarrass me, Yonit, even though I know you will not stop trying. There are no
Challenge
photographs.
Accepted. Challenge accepted. I will find the photos. So this is very exciting. It's our pod mitzvah.
Yeah.
We are now accountable for all our sins. We cannot blame our parents for anything, not getting our points across on this podcast or anything. It's very exciting. And this week, consider our bar mitzvah present this week. Cabinet Minister Michael Gove is in Israel.
That's right. That is our Bar Mitzvah gift as Britain to you in Israel. Forget the fountain pen my father would have got. Forget the digital watch, which was state-of-the-art in 1980, which I got. Instead, we have given you Cabinet Minister Michael Gove, travelling along with Deputy Chief Medical Officer Jonathan Van Tam, who has become a bit of a media darling here, going to Israel to check out how brilliantly Israel has handled its vaccination rollout. And, I think most people here interpret this as being preparing the ground for Britain to do what Israel has done, which is the introduction of vaccine passports. Very controversial here.
Yeah, I was thinking about how controversial it is in Britain and in Europe, the whole conversation, and in the United States. It's amazing how the whole issue of sort of infringing on civil liberties was not even an issue in Israel, right? I mean, that kind of passed without public discourse. The whole issue of the green passports.
Yeah, it's funny. Here it's been very big, and that could be that sort of English tradition or British tradition of liberty. Truth is, that is often honoured more in the breach. There are more CCTV cameras, I think, in Britain than more or less any country outside China. But the public narrative, the thing we tell ourselves in Britain is, we care tremendously about civil liberties, and therefore people are very upset about vaccine passports, the idea of having to show your papers, and they think there'll be discrimination against those groups and individuals who did not want to take a vaccine passport. And so I reckon Michael Gove and Jonathan Van Tam want to check out Israel and come back and say, look, we looked at this place and it's all going really well and there's nothing for you to fear. The thing I can't help but notice is this. I think it may be the first time that Israel has been in the news and in the media here for a sustained period for a story that isn't about the conflict or politics in Israel. I don't know whether that's ever happened before for this length of time. So now it's getting on for months that you hear Israel on the news, and chances are it's not about the West Bank, it's not about war, or Netanyahu and his cabinet. It is instead about how it's handled COVID. And I think that may be a shift, actually, in how Israel is discussed in the media discourse in this country and perhaps elsewhere around the world.
Yeah, let's see how long that lasts. By the way, both countries are actually talking about also a travel corridor, which means that one day we could actually record this podcast in the same room or just on a plane. Maybe
I know we could meet at Heathrow Departure Lounge, couldn't we? Like they do when they have those sort of diplomatic back channels. No, I think there's, and I have to say, people are already writing to us saying, please, will we do an Unholy live in front of an audience? This is imagining a day when people can do anything in front of an audience. But that will be wonderful when we can do that. And I think Gove is a pioneer in that regard. He's hoping to blaze a trail so that, yeah, exactly, there can be safe passage between the two countries. And it seems very likely given Israel's numbers on COVID and now Britain's.
So let's say we're sitting in the Heathrow lounge and you're pouring me a stiff drink and we're going to talk about Israeli politics. Haven't talked about that in a while.
We haven't had the chance. So go on, what's happening?
Well, remember that children's book, Alexander and the Terrible, Horrible, No Good, Very Bad Day?
Yes.
That is what has been going on with Benjamin Netanyahu this week. Look, I think it's safe to... I'm going to say something very dramatic. Are you preparing the drum roll?
I'm gripping the arms of my chair.
I think we are... Netanyahu is on the verge of possibly losing power. It's with Netanyahu, you always have to give that, right? You always have to say the possibly. But it has been a very bad week for him. Let's sort of set the stage. The only option right now that he had, and we talked about this a lot, Jonathan, right? That coalition that would stretch from Bezalel Smotrich and Itamar Ben-Gvir on the extreme right to the Islamist movement, Mansour Abbas's party, Ram, that is not going to happen. Right, Smotrich was very clear on saying no way. It's funny. You asked me last week if the circle is any more squareable. It's not a circle. It's not a square. It's a unicorn. Right. It's not going to happen. Mansour Abbas, who I interviewed 2 days ago, said, we're sick and tired of hearing Smotrich telling us that we're support terror. If Netanyahu can't get his act together, he can't get his coalition together, we're done with this, right? So more than anything, it was Smotrich who, if anything, Netanyahu just pushed as hard as he could into the Knesset, telling Netanyahu, I'm not gonna bend for you to create this coalition. Now, Abbas is not only saying, he's also doing, and that is extremely important in a very crucial vote for Netanyahu. Abbas crossed the road in the very last minute, joined the Israeli anti-Bibi bloc, and voted against Netanyahu while the voting actually was already in session. And what actually happened is that Netanyahu lost power over the Knesset. I'm not going to get, too granular into the details, but the Knesset Arrangement Committee is the one that controls the Knesset until there is a government. Netanyahu lost control over that. Now, the most important thing that happened is that the architect of Netanyahu's downfall in this regard was Gideon Sa'ar. Remember him, who broke away from the Likud, started his own power, thought for a minute he might become even prime minister, but completely crossed the road into the anti-Bibi bloc. And he was seen, and now an image that has become, I would want to say, almost iconic in this week in Israel, kind of definitely a gif. He winked. You saw him wink behind Netanyahu's back in the Knesset. And that was so symbolic, right? Netanyahu was usually the perpetrator of these tricks, and now he was the recipient. And the whole kind of political world in Israel and the whole country kind of saw how he was duped by his rival. And that was very, very important, I think. I want to say the wink that sailed 1,000 tweets, but that in that regard, that was a really important picture this week.
No, I love that, the kind of maneuvering. It's not original, but on my part, I think... do we give our producer, Leo Friedman, credit for calling it the West Wink? I think that's a bit of...
We give him credit for all titles, Jonathan.
That's really neat because it was a classic bit of sort of beltway politics, maneuvering, etc. But it's entirely captured in that very human gesture. And exactly, the schemer... The arch schemer, Bibi Netanyahu, now undone, but he's the schemee. He's undone by other people scheming, and somehow the wink just sort of captures that. I mean, it's fascinating to me because, apart from those of us who follow this in great detail, I don't think, for example, in offices of prime ministers and presidents around the world, they will be paying any attention to this because the assumption is that Bibi is going to be on the throne of Israel as long as Queen Elizabeth is on the throne here. He's just there forever. And it's kind of like, tell us when he's actually gone. But people are kind of like, I'll believe it when I see it, because they think he's a kind of Harry Houdini figure. He is... Or to mix the metaphor, like one of those old 1920s movies, he's tied to the railway tracks and the train is coming, and somehow by the end of the reel he's going to have wriggled out of it. But what you've said says the odds are getting increasingly stacked against it.
Yes, I think that what we need to sort of keep in mind, Israelis kind of know this and feel it, but I don't know if the sort of outside world knows this. Netanyahu is thoroughly convinced that he must remain in power for his legal situation, right? In other words, he thinks that remaining with the power and the gravitas of being a prime minister will create a situation in which the judges in his trial and the witnesses and the state's witnesses are less likely to return with a guilty verdict. This is what he's building his whole sort of rationale on, right? That staying a prime minister is a getting out of jail card. So I'm going to take a step back for a minute and say that we still have 12 days for his mandate. You can still see the crazy, surprising, scenario. What's been sort of floating around this week is saying Netanyahu actually saying, you know what? I'm stepping down and someone else from the Likud is going to become prime minister for a rotation for a year, for 2 years, and then no one has anything to object because you were just objecting me personally, right? So let's see how that happens. I don't know how, it is possible in the by Israeli law. I don't know how plausible it is for Netanyahu to actually say, I am stepping down. I would say that the likeliest option right now, if you'd say you need to put all your chips on the board, I would say it is we're staring down the barrel of fifth elections, right? Because for the Netanyahu, and you see that in the way that he is attacking Naftali Bennett, because he kind of realizes that he doesn't have a government, so he doesn't have to woo Bennett anymore, but he needs to attack him to make the other option of another government impossible. So that is what he's doing. That's how you kind of realize that what he thinks the best option for him right now is to stay on the wheel, go to fifth elections, and then see what happens.
If he were to step down, how does that help him with his legal problem? Because then doesn't he lose the immunity?
That's why I don't think it's realistic for him as an idea. It sort of opens up this. I think many people in the Likud are trying to convince him, give it to someone who isn't dangerous for you, right? Not someone who's trying to usurp you, just like a Yuval Steinitz or a Yariv Levin, who I'll call him like the Mitch McConnell of the Israeli parliament, right? Give it to him for a while and then take it back. I think I agree, and you made that point that for someone who is so crucially attached to the position because of his legal woes, I think that would be a very big deal for him to give it up. It would, raise everyone else from the deadlock, but it's also, going to create a very, very right-wing government in any case.
So we should watch out for it. It's the sort of Putin-Medvedev maneuver where you stay really in charge, but you have some nominal titular figure who's an ally take the top job and then you swap back out again. I'm sure Bibi will enjoy this parallel with Putin. I mean, one thing I love doing is looking for little slivers of light in amongst all the gloom. And to me, one of the positives to take from all of this, in all this horse trading, and I think we've made this point before on the podcast, but part of it is this figure of Mansour Abbas and his Ram party. And somehow, that is being normalized, even if it does shake out without that government being formed. The idea that at least one of the pieces on the board is an Arab party, and surely, and I don't know when that day is going to come, but I saw that Yair Lapid, the opposition leader, had meetings with leaders from the joint list, Ahmed Tibi and Ayman Auda and everything. It's just becoming a little bit more normal to imagine Arab parties being players in the coalition arithmetic, and that has to be a good thing. As I say, it's a tiny bit of silver lining. There's obviously a very big cloud, not least for Bibi himself. I wanted to cross over to a different part of the world and head west and talk with you about a figure who is big, currently in media in America, but I think maybe one day in politics, and that is Tucker Carlson of Fox News. He sometimes is the top-rated news anchor on cable TV, sometimes loses out that top spot to Rachel Maddow of MSNBC. The two of them kind of jostle to be the number one show on cable. He's in the news as we speak because of his seen to be very tasteless reaction to the triple guilty verdict against Derek Chauvin, the former Minneapolis policeman who has been found responsible for the death of George Floyd. And Tucker Carlson did a couple of weird interviews on TV in which he, in one, laughed in a very weird and deranged way and was taking a kind of, against the grain line on that. But I wanted particularly to foreground him because, of all things, the Anti-Defamation League has called for him to be fired by Fox News. The Anti-Defamation League, the mainly Jewish organization that campaigns against racism and anti-Semitism in the United States. Quite unusual for them to make this move and say, we want Tucker Carlson gone from his job. So I thought it'd be just, I mean, there's a specific reason for that, but it's worth sort of winding back the background to this, Jewish attitude to Tucker Carlson, who he is. I mean, he's this top-rated show on Fox. He has been talked about in the absence, really, of Donald Trump as the voice of, populist conservatism, maybe even a kind of nationalist America First conservatism. Some people thinking he is in effect a white nationalist. That's the position that's critical of him. But seeing that he's not just dominating media, but he's really a rising figure in politics, and they even talk of him running for president in 2024. That always has long worried the kind of pro-Israel crowd, because he just does not make the usual kind of pro-Israel noises that are very familiar on the American right. This, despite the fact that, by the way, Yair Netanyahu, the Prime Minister's son, the kind of Donald Trump Jr. of Israel, as I like to think of him, has tweeted, that he tweeted a picture of himself, arm around the shoulder of Tucker Carlson, saying, "Oh, he's so pro-Israel, great friend of Israel." Actually, the evidence is really not there. He doesn't make the usual sort of ritual noises in support of Israel, and if anything, really attacks big pro-Israel conservatives, and that has been noticed. But what's happened now that got the ADL perked up is that Tucker Carlson earlier this month started talking in the language of replacement theory. This is the theory that the mainly majority white population historically of America is being replaced by ethnic minorities and immigrants, and that is being done deliberately. And guess who's doing the replacing? You guessed it, it's the Jews. That's the theory. And people will remember, in Charlottesville, "Jews will not replace us" was one of the slogans. Right. And Tucker Carlson went on air and sort of voiced that on Fox. We can hear a bit of that right here.
I know that the left and all the little gatekeepers on Twitter become literally hysterical if you use the term replacement, if you suggest that the Democratic Party is trying to replace the current electorate, the voters now casting ballots, with new people, more obedient voters from the third world. But they become hysterical because that's what's happening, actually. Let's just say it, that's true. This is a voting rights question. I have less political power because they're importing a brand new electorate. Why should I sit back and take that? The power that I have as an American guaranteed at birth is one man, one vote, and they're diluting it. No, they're not allowed to do that. Why are we putting up with this?
I remember that day, January 20th, right, when Trump left the White House, and you had, there's obviously a collective sort of sigh of relief amongst the American left. But you also had a lot of people asking a question. They said to themselves, Trump was a populist, but obviously he ultimately failed. What happens if one day a populist comes along who is sophisticated, intelligent, and successful? And that could be Tucker Carlson. That well may be when we look at the lineup of who will be the nominees in 2024 or 2023 when the sort of race heats up. And you mentioned Nikki Haley, you mentioned Mike Pompeo, very, very pro-Israeli, obviously in the rhetoric. Tucker Carlson, who is an interesting sort of figure in that because he is Trumpian in all regards, but he isn't at all pro-Israel. I would say maybe not very enthusiastic of Israel, but maybe more. I'm not exactly sure. He never talks about that, at least from what I've seen on his program. And when you look at the fact that we in 4 years, and again, it's interesting. I keep telling you that we have to recalibrate what we talk about Israel's left and right. It's not Israel left and right. It's Israel pro-Bibi, anti-Bibi. And let's kind of use that to recalibrate the conversation in the United States when we discuss what is pro-Israel and anti-Israel, right? Because you have all those research, especially the Pew research that says that it always asks, what is your view of the Israeli people? What is your view of the Israeli government? And you always have Democrats basically saying 55% favorable of Israeli people, 20% favorable of the Israeli government, and Republicans are basically saying 77% favorable of Israeli people and 60% favorable of the Israeli government. Why am I saying this? Because you had an alignment for 4 years, and Democrats looked at it and saw Trump equals Netanyahu equals Israel. And I think that made it hard for them to sort of overlook that or circumvent that equation. Now that you have Trump out of it, we don't know what the Netanyahu situation is. How does that shift the relation to Israel? And if you look at 4 years into the future and you say maybe a Tucker Carlson in the Republican Party who has no affiliation to Israel, basically. And on the other side, you might not, again, have this sort of traditional relationship with Israel that is, embodied with the Joe Bidens and the Nancy Pelosi's and the Chuck Schumers of the world. What are you going to see there? I think that Israelis should be very, concerned about that. I kind of shifted away from your Tucker Carlson conversation.
No, I think it's really interesting because I think there is a generational shift. It's so interesting that the person who embodies the traditional democratic affiliation for Israel is Joe Biden, and he's so old. And similarly, Nancy Pelosi, and she's so old. These are people in their late 70s.
They're mature.
They embody that. And the people of the next generation, so whether it's AOC among the Democrats or Tucker Carlson, I mean, he's super young, but he's a generation down.
Yep.
They are in a very different place. And I think it's just interesting that the pro-Israel crowd got worried simply because Tucker Carlson, as you say, never even talked about Israel. That made them think, what's he hiding? What's his attitude? And the fact that he, as I say, platforms these people who are very critical.
Yeah. I mean, you just said Tucker Carlson and AOC in the same sentence. So somewhere a minefield just blew up.
Yes, although, that maybe is the future of politics. It's going to be those people.
But I completely agree when you look at the research and you see that the younger you are in the United States, and this has no connection to your political affiliation. The younger you are, the less you have a connection to Israel.
Which you actually brought out in your very brilliant reports from the United States for Channel 12, that generational shift. So I think that's definitely there. I was going to just say one last thing about Tucker Carlson, which interests me, which is I think he is the protege or child of Pat Buchanan. More that people look to Trump as the guide for Tucker Carlson, and I think instead the person you want to look at is Pat Buchanan, TV host in the 90s with Tucker Carlson on this show Crossfire. That was Pat Buchanan's domain, and Tucker Carlson came up as a very young presenter on that when he was in his 20s. But the point about Pat Buchanan is he was Trump before Trump in the sense of this nationalist, populist, anti-elite guy, but also really unusually anti-Israel, famously referred to, Congress as the Amen corner for the state of Israel, and referred to Capitol Hill as Israeli-occupied territory, which shaded into a kind of anti-Jewish trope. And Pat Buchanan is, I think, if Tucker Carlson takes things further politically, that interface between cable TV and nationalism with a sort of anti-Israel and maybe even something else tinge, people will find themselves going back to the works of Pat Buchanan, who I've seen actually in his dotage is writing blogs defending and boosting Tucker Carlson. So there's definitely a connection there, and one to watch, even with some degree of trepidation, Yonit.
I can't not think. There's a soundbite running in my head every time someone says Pat Buchanan. I don't know if you remember this. I was a teenager, so I didn't really care about the world, but I remember that he was fighting against the UN about something. I don't remember what it was, but obviously it's Pat Buchanan, so he's anti-UN. But he said, and the Secretary General was Boutros Ghali, and he said, we don't take our orders from Boo Ghali. I remember that soundbite for some reason.
Very
and
very
that was sort of like twisting his name, obviously on purpose, which of course became a Trumpian trope. Years.
I was just thinking of our listener in Boca Raton, which I have who I've teased a few times.
Yes.
The last thing we should probably say about Pat Buchanan on this, but you'll remember this is what I thought you were going to refer to when you were talking about being a teenager because you are so young. But of course, I was much older and covered this. But the Florida deadlocked election of 2000,
yes.
One of the giveaways was in Palm Beach County there was the famous butterfly ballot.
Oh, of course, the people voted for Pat Buchanan instead of voting for Al Gore.
The way you knew something had gone wrong was all these Jews and elderly Jews, and most of them Democrats, who obviously wanted to vote for Al Gore, were registered as voting this huge bounce for Pat Buchanan, who was running as a third-party candidate there. And, that was the moment you knew something was up, because there was no way the Jews of Boca Raton were voting for, white nationalist Pat Buchanan or nationalist Pat Buchanan, if we want to be fair to him. All right, we have to dole out some awards. The
Yes.
Chutzpah slot. Very tempted to nominate Naomi Wolf, once admired as a great feminist critic, now an anti-vax activist who told Fox News that the beloved figure of Anthony Fauci, the main, anti-coronavirus doctor who's been the lead anti-infectious disease doctor for the United States for 40 years, doesn't work for us, she said. He doesn't work for America. He's conflicted because she said he got $1 million from the state of Israel. So that was her pitch. It turns out that Anti-Fauci did indeed win a prize from an Israeli university, the prestigious Dan David Prize from Tel Aviv University. But she went on Fox News to say he doesn't work for us, he receives money from Israel. So Naomi Wolf gets a chutzpah nomination for going to the dark side, but she really has to bow to the greatest chutzpah event of the week. Maybe not massive news for everyone all over the world, but for those of us here in the home, as we would think of it, of football here in England, the Super League gave itself that name. So, the breakaway of 12 European clubs. It's launched on Sunday. It was over and done by Tuesday evening. But the loathing...
That was a quick coup.
It was a quick and failed coup. But what a chutzpah for these owners of these clubs to think that they were just mere corporate assets rather than treasured and cherished institutions with roots in the towns. I talk to you now, a 10-minute walk away from Arsenal Stadium. My kids, me, we go, we put the scarves on, we go. It matters to our local area. It isn't just a sort of brand that can be sold off and or exploited for a global market. And they tried, and fan power meant that they failed. But I think they should get a chutzpah award for the effort.
Yeah, I mean, what an idea of breathtaking arrogance, right? Of not realizing that I'm a small football expert. I would say an anti-football expert. But that what it's
What's
about.
What's your team, Yonit? I don't know your team.
I will have to say Hapoel Tel Aviv, because if I don't say that, I won't be able to return. My door will be, mysteriously locked when I try and get home. So I'm going to say Hapoel Tel Aviv.
Very good. That would be my Israeli team
and
too.
And sotto voce, I'll say I don't care. But just that, even I realize that football is about that kind of competition and about hope, and that these groups were founded by work. I mean, how can you do that? How can you do what they tried to do? I a very smart person that I follow on Twitter, Jonathan Friedland, you might know him, spoke about how this also kind of illustrates the fact that the government is sort of powerless, right, in the face of this of this kind of move.
Well, it was like a test. I mean, in the end, the government didn't have to take that on because the league collapsed itself, and you put your finger on what was wrong with it, which is it guaranteed places for these teams, no matter how well or badly they did. But government could have been tested if they'd persisted, because there were people saying, look, if you look at the law and the European competition law, there's nothing anyone can do. These are global companies, and what can a mere national government do to stop them doing whatever they like with their product and with their properties? And I thought that was going to be a real test for politics, because the whole nation here was more or less united against this idea. No one disliked it. The government said, we are going to do whatever it takes to stop it. If they had tried and failed, my worry was really for the state, for democratic politics itself. I worried that there would be people in this country who would say, well, what is the point of voting for a government if they cannot even do this where the whole country agrees on something? They're powerless to do it. So that was what I felt why this was an issue that went beyond football. It was really about who owns these things? Where does power lie? Is it with nations or is it with these transnational corporations? And this is an issue that activists and analysts have been talking about in the abstract for years. But suddenly you had the great mass of the British population, and similarly in Spain and in Italy, who really felt it in their lives. And it could have been a really fascinating political moment. As it is, they've collapsed on their own behalf. But so much for chutzpah. What about, if we're finding silver in the clouds, what about the mensch? Who should be our mensch?
Okay, so for the mensch of the week, I invite you to relieve yourself of your usual English Republican vibes, if I may.
Oh, yeah, well, okay. I'm embracing myself.
Celebrate the 95th birthday of Queen Elizabeth II, Her Majesty.
Should I be standing up for this bit, Yonit?
Should I be standing up, or you? Because I'm still thinking, I don't know, I'm thinking of the British man. Maybe both of us would probably solve it that way. So I know you're not a big fan of the monarchy. We dedicated almost a whole program discussing that. But I think that you can't ignore the remarkable life story of this lady who's was actually never born into the line of succession. Now is the head of state for nearly 70 years, and obviously a bittersweet celebration for her in the midst of the mourning period over Prince Philip. We have to say something about that image that kind of shocked the world or saddened the world of her sitting by herself in the cathedral in the funeral.
No, it's absolutely right. Just on a human level, a woman, as you say, turning 95, sitting widowed alone is a very, very poignant image. And next year, incredibly, the Platinum Jubilee. There's never been one, a monarch on the throne for 70 years. And I've written this a few times, she is this connection to what is still the defining event of modern Britain, which is the Second World War, 1940. You know, you look at Britain standing alone, 1945, she's there on the balcony alongside Winston Churchill. You know, she is absolutely core to the kind of the British imagination, how they literally imagine how we imagine ourselves. And so, you know, even a small R Republican like me cannot challenge that. The bond is very strong, and frankly, it will be even stronger after the funeral at the weekend, because the sympathy for seeing her alone like that, and also the fact they couldn't do a normal funeral because they were complying with COVID regulations. You know, even the head of state has to comply with the rules. So, okay, I will...
we'll make a monarchist of you yet.
I will park my Republican sentiment and allow that Mensch nomination. I will chip in one of my own, and that is for a U.S. federal judge who this week ruled that an Orthodox Jewish Navy sailor, a Hasidic sailor, doesn't have to shave his beard, for now anyway, in order to be fitted for the seal of a gas mask, but instead can... be exempted from that on the grounds of a religious exemption. I mean, the big thing that leaps out at me from this story is, can you believe there is a Hasidic sailor? I mean, Petty Officer Third Class Edmund de Lishkia, if I'm pronounced that right, who is serving aboard the aircraft carrier, the USS Theodore Roosevelt in Asia. He is apparently a Haredi sailor. I mean, even a Jewish sailor is for me a bit of a stretch. Boats and Jews, I don't know. But
water,
I know,
etc.
Water. I know that's wrong because I think there's even an Israeli Olympic windsurfer and all that. So I know that's very out of date. But a Hasidic sailor in the Navy, for me it was news, and good for that judge saying, a sailor can be exempted, for it doesn't have to shave his beard. That feels like
great news for Hasidic sailors and hipsters alike.
Yes, exactly. Hipster or Hasid is one of my favourite games.
Or both.
Or both. But anyway, he's exempted, so good for him. That is a triumph for our Mensch Awards, the two of them. Why don't we try and get the Queen and the Hasidic sailor to have a meeting? They can be in a photograph receiving jointly their awards. How likely or unlikely is that? If you've enjoyed our little tour around Israel and the Jewish world, you must recommend and review us favourably. Give us a 5-star review. And Yonit wants to say something.
I do. How did you figure that with my Israeli nudging?
That was a tap on the shoulder.
It was very elegantly done, don't you think? No, we wanted to shout out to our listener, Tammuz, who wrote us on our Instagram page. Did we mention that we had an Instagram page, Jonathan? This is your line usually, but it's 2 Jews on the news, only letters, no numbers. And she wrote us, she's 14 years old, and she says, I've been listening to your podcast. I will not miss a single episode. It's the best English lesson there is, because I learn a lot from it, and even my grades in the English profession have improved a lot. That is so sweet, and it was so nice to get a message, and we're really happy that you're listening. Tammuz, listen more to Jonathan than you do to me if you're trying to learn English.
I'm not sure about that because all of my colloquial Britishisms, but Tammuz, that is fantastic. Stand down, Your Majesty. Stand down, Hasidische sailor. The Mensch must go to Tammuz. Well done, you. And I dread to think what kind of awful English. Didn't I swear on last week's podcast? This is awful.
You did.
Tammuz is going to learn very bad habits.
Let's hope she wasn't listening.
I do regret that. So yes, follow us, 2 Jews on the news, reviews, all the rest of it. Mention us to your friends. And who do we want to say thank you to besides Tammuz?
And our glorious, I want to give him some sort of award, but I don't know what. So we'll think about it until next week. Our executive producer, Leora Friedman, and Rom Atik, head of podcasts, and Dani Nudelman, and Irad Eshel for original music. And thank you, Jonathan.
Thank you, Yonit. See you next time.